Well, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I heard I'm a whisperer, so hopefully it gets across. So my name is Noah Rafelko, and I'm here to discuss with my counterpart, Shane Unfred, the intersection of regulation and technology. And most would think that that might be a boring subject, but considering that daily at this point you're going to see different opinions coming out of different governments globally, I think it's quite important that we discuss not only what is here today, but where we came from and where we're going. So this is going to be an interactive session, and though there is no free microphone out there, if there are any questions, we will repeat the questions for those who are streaming. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to have Shane introduce himself. And then we're going to go into what the past has looked like in the regulatory environment, because myself, and this will be my introduction, I come from advanced communications technology from the commercial sector. I usually have to interact with the government to keep them up to speed as much as possible, as many times as I have to say the same things over and over again. But I've been in the business for well over 20 years. I've been dealing with every advanced communication that you use today, whether it's voice over IP, whether it's the internet, whether it's texting, regular landlines, interactive bots that you may communicate with a brand, or AI. And now we're working on the edge of technology again, and that's applying the latest technology, which is blockchain technology. So you'll always see us sitting right at that cusp of the edge, and hence why we're communicating with the government pretty often. Shane, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Noah. Shane Unfred, over product and biz dev. Career been really on the carrier side of the business, the tier 1, tier 2 carriers, really focused and leading the charge on adopting newer technologies. One of the last stints was taking a dial-up internet network and putting voice over IP on it. So the first nationwide U.S. voice over IP network. And then have been working on artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies and figuring out how does that solve our common day-to-day problems as a company, but also as an industry viewpoint, and how does that enhance the lives of enterprises and consumers, etc.
And that's a really good place to start. So could you please change to the first slide? And this is really going to be about the past. And it's interesting that Shane brought up how he turned a single dial-up network, which I'm sure everyone can vaguely remember dialing up into an access point to access the internet with their XX baud modems. Well, when that started to change, and Shane was part of a nationwide company that was supporting pretty much every single dial-up entity out there that just used this single network to access their back end, I started to hear this rumble that they were going to convert this into a voice over IP network. And at the time, I knew no other network in the entire globe that had a single access point that could handle so many geographically diverse locations across the United States. There might have been some small little pockets, but there certainly wasn't anything nationwide. And that's when I called up this company, at the time Level 3, and I ended up speaking and meeting for the first time Shane Unfred, who was running all that, the entire voice product. And what I determined at that point is, okay, well, here we are with this new technology. I wonder how they're looking at the regulation of it. Are there going to be the same rules as there are for number portability? Are there going to be the same rules for how you had to keep a single number in a certain region, or is that going to break down the walls so that we could actually assign numbers wherever you are in the United States with a virtual number? You no longer needed to be tied to a physical wire. And that's where the regulation really started. The regulatory environment started very basic identity because they had a copper wire between their facility and a physical location, a brick and mortar building you had. And that's how they could always attest your identity. Pretty simple stuff, right? So, when I looked at it, I looked at this technology that was so far ahead of the regulators. When I contacted the regulators on it, they had no answers for me. They didn't know what they were going to do. They knew that it was an unregulated part of the industry. In fact, it stayed unregulated for quite some time. And that's usually an indication that it hasn't evolved yet. When you see a technology first start out, you're going to see a lot of it stay in that lane of unregulated. And that's because they just don't have the capability or the insights to actually start to regulate. And I want to pause there because I want to ask Shane his opinion, because there are two sides to this opinion. There's the technologist like me, the inventor, right, and the designer, using this new technology for the best interest of my clients, being large enterprise and those who wanted to advance their communications. And then there was the legacy environment, the phone company, basically. And if we all remember, the phone company with Lily Tomlin, that's the attitude the phone companies, in a sense, still have, if you can imagine it. So Shane, what was your opinion, and what was the take from the regulatory point of view of that intersection of technology and regulation?
It was a contested environment in that there was one facet that was trying to protect the access charges associated with their existing business relative to how to manage voice over IP. A lot of the regulators from a carrier perspective were hands off, so we kind of had the ability to create and develop, and then as we got further into it, then it's like, maybe we should put some guidelines around what we're doing with voice over IP. And as part of that regulation and discussion, the next component, other than just the raw transport, was around 911, and what do we have to do with that from a compliance and regulatory standpoint. So it was ad hoc. The challenge was around innovation, but not stifling innovation with regulatory, but putting in the guardrails to where you can still proceed and develop and enhance what you're doing. So I think that was part of it.
And thank you, Shane. And when I saw this starting to form, there was this new community forming around this new technology of voice over IP. And a really good friend of mine started that community up. His name was Jeff Pulver. He ran this trade show called VON, Voice over Net. And at that point, nobody really understood the intersection of this new technology and how it would really impact so many different lives. It actually was the evolution of what we know today as Web 2.0. So you have to understand that Web 1.0 was just search engines, basic connectivity. Web 2.0 is where we ended up starting to evolve this new network into what types of use cases we could actually utilize. One of those, as Shane had stated, is 911, something we took just completely for granted. If you think about when your copper line or your line to your home was there, you picked up, you dialed 911, and somebody knew exactly where you were, because that level of attestation was always there. They knew where you were. What happened when voice over IP or Web 2.0 happened is you decoupled an existing telephone number that was historically tied to a landline that had a point-to-point right to your home or business, and now you decoupled this service and put it into this thing called the cloud at the time. Nobody knew what the cloud was at that moment, but it was this virtual space. Well, that had two impacts. One, it broke this ability to instantly offer emergency services like 911. So what happened to this new solution that my friend ended up founding called Vonage? Well, Vonage ran into a wall. They had this little boy die in Florida. And man, oh man, I've never seen the regulators work so fast in my entire life to catch up. They had something deployed and mandated within months. It doesn't work that way in regulation. It takes years and back and forth and fighting, challenges. So what Shane's talking about from a telephone company perspective is that they knew that this decoupled, but how are they going to face it? And when did they need to face it? Because nobody faces anything that the regulators say unless they're forced to. That's how it works. So 911 was forced along. That evolved voice over IP. Eventually, voice over IP became regulated in a sense. So it went from this unregulated environment, this Wild West, we'll call it, to a more regulated environment. And then you fast forward and you're talking about text messaging was the next one that came out. In 2007, I was lucky enough again to be on that edge of technology, and I still worked with this phone company, Level 3 at the time, and someone came to me, another technologist, and said, hey, I heard you can text enable a voice over IP line. And my jaw literally hit the desk. I said, wait a second, are you telling me I can take this wireless classified number and now communicate from a non-wireless class number like it's a wireless class number? I can enhance this feature with texting? Oh my gosh. So I started to spin up designs left and right, and some of them, had to do with interactive communications and how can you be more smart about this communications, because now it's not living in this closed network of wireless carriers where you can't get the data out of. Now you can actually glean the data. And how does that impact a phone company? So Shane, back to you. I'd like to understand, when this happened in 2007, I know you weren't in Lumen or Level 3 at the time. What's the perception coming from that corporate environment that you could see inevitably happening when now you had two different services sitting on the same asset being a telephone number, but now in Web 2.0, now they can ride on two different networks, and that's what they did. So you have a voice network, and now you have a texting network. How was the opinion at that point coming from a telephone company perspective?
Most of it was, I'm going to ignore it. I don't want to deal with it. It's too hard. I don't understand it. I'm just going to ignore it. As long as I can continue to sell local numbers and sell the voice transporter around it, I'm happy with that. And obviously we fast forward to today's world, and now the carriers are like, what are we doing? We should have been in that business. I'm a licensed operator. I need to understand where my numbers actually reside in this new industry called messaging, SMS messaging, and I have no visibility to it. Because you think about, from a carrier perspective, the voice side has input into multiple databases, multiple FCC requirements for reporting, PUC, state government for reporting, but on the messaging side, none of that exists. There is no reporting of numbers and where they reside and who is the licensed operator. So you think about technology and regulation in the very beginning, not the beginning, but call it 20 years ago, before this new technology, voice over IP, came about, regulation was very stagnant. It was all about, how do I ensure there's fair competition? How do I ensure there's rules and policies around access, etc.? And the thing is, products were developed maybe once a year. Very stagnant. But now with voice over IP, we removed a lot of the barriers with creating new products. New software came about, more scalable servers came about versus a hardened switch that sits at a prem. And what that enabled people to do was create these products and services almost daily. And that's what we see today. But now you have the regulation that it's like, well, now we have all these apps out there and app developers creating these new products, and tomorrow it's on the marketplace. How do we enforce regulation on it? Should we enforce regulation on it? And as we all know, and we see this on a global basis, with the lack of regulation in text messaging and not keeping up on the voice side of regulation, we all see robocalls every day. And we see spam text messages every day.
Yeah, and that leads right into, if you could switch to the next slide, please. That leads into today. As soon as we can get that next slide up. How do I do the slides? There we go. I can do that. I learned this back in school. Okay, so now we're in Web 2.0, right? We're on the verge of this thing called Web 3.0, which we'll get into in the next slide. But where does that leave us with regulatory? Well, we're in a big dumpster fire right now, right? Like this is a hot mess. When I was in texting, and I saw this separation of a phone company not really caring about this asset that was a communications channel sitting on top of a regulated service being voice, but as an unregulated feature, I started to call the alarm. I started to raise the alarm with the FCC and the FTC. And I said, wait a second, I'm seeing a lot of things happening right now that are not good for the public. And we as a group, and I say we as a group because there's some members in this audience that joined me in this fight, and we went to the FCC and said, wait a second, because you have no oversight and you have no input and you think that the industry is just going to work itself out, a new software player came into the communication space and basically was assigned as a monopolistic role to manage toll-free texting. And it impacted us all. And this is where that intersection really had a car crash, because you have this regulated industry saying, well, wait a second, I have this telephone number I lease from, inevitably it comes from the government, it's leased to a licensed operator, and eventually works its way down to you. That's how a real phone number works, at least in the United States. You really don't own the phone number. There are a few exceptions, but that was just an experiment by the FCC. But when it came to raising the alarm, it was, wait a second, how are you letting a small industry, which is big to us now, but the mobile industry, how are you letting them assign a proxy monopoly to manage something that just got turned off from one day to another? Like, all of us were using this wonderful text-enabled telephone number on toll-free numbers in the United States, and we woke up one day and it stopped working on one of the top 3 wireless networks. So I was on the phone with the FCC and everybody I could reach saying, wait a second, this would be illegal if this happened in voice. You would be raising, the holy grail and swinging at people if this happened. What's wrong with you? And when we went there, it fell upon deaf ears. Now, why did it fall upon deaf ears? Because over the years, something has happened that's really, really disturbing in regulation. And it really comes into this mess. Okay, and it's very colorful, but it's just an example of how we face regulation at this point. And you'll see on the far right of the screen, that's actually the timeline of this wonderful thing to protect consumers called net neutrality. It was put in by regulators to protect you from getting your internet throttled. Do you remember that? Where people were saying, hey, we're going to give one highway for higher paying folks and one highway for super highway for the lower paying folks, which would impact consumers. So they came up with these rules called net neutrality. And they kicked that can back and forth, and it went one way and it went another way. And inevitably what happened to the regulation side of it is it's where it is today, completely neutered. Your rights are completely wiped out. So this separation that happened when Web 2.0 started has not reduced in size. In fact, it's drastically grown. And when you see this and you look at how this takes effect and how industry started to take control of this mechanism, then you run into this, the future. Now, what's going to happen in the future? Well, I'll tell you what we need to do as a society, and that's work together with folks, not be the captured entity that the FCC is. And there was this paper that, actually I missed the slide. The captured agency in this is a report done by a Harvard professor where he indicated that the FCC in the United States had been infiltrated. It sounds kind of creepy and kind of like spy-esque, right? Well, it really actually happened. When I went down and tried to represent a group of like-minded people in DC, I found that out firsthand. I found out that there were more lobbyists in the United States Capitol for telecom than any other industry. And that's the second largest industry in the world is telecom. The first is energy. So can you imagine that there were more lobbyists fighting against regulation in telecom than energy? So we come back to the future. Now, why do we want to talk about the future? Well, if they can't keep up with the past, how can we ever expect them to keep up with the future? So we're on this cusp of something that is a massive shift. It's called Web 3.0. And I am telling you this just like you might have heard way back about this weird thing called the cloud or the internet. This is such a paradigm shift that everyone needs to pay attention, especially the regulators, because they're already light years behind technology. So how do we embrace this? Well, this is where I want to bring some conversation into this and some interaction. So if somebody wants to ask a question about it, I want to talk about the future because I live in the future all the time. I've lived in the future my entire career. So when it comes to the impact of Web 3.0 and how we've now decoupled identity from, reality, now it's this digital identity versus our physical identity. And that's coming in the shape of things called that you'll hear out there, the metaverse and, Web3. And that's because it's all becoming that we have this digital life that's now grown beyond our physical life. In regulation, there's no such thing. You can't even see them in the rearview mirror anymore. They used to be a little blip, and now they're gone. So how do we actually see this coming? And is there any impacts that you're facing that I could help enlighten, and Shane could help enlighten you on as to what we see because we're already living it? Anyone?
I would also add that, on the regulatory standpoint, we're going back to Web 2.0, that now at least the FCC is trying to take some steps around regulation, right? So on the robocall side, they put in stir shaken, right, which they claim that be able to trace a call and see it, and caller ID is validated. But I think everybody's still getting robocalls. I am. So it's not working. And from an FCC perspective, what we keep hearing is they see it as a success. I don't see it as a success. Yeah, Michael.
There we go. So I don't really know how to word this question, so maybe you can help me. So my idea is, what is the role of the regulator in terms of truly being able to protect people? And if we looked at the recent MMA trust study results that Dario and I spoke about yesterday morning, or excuse me, sorry, old hat, MEF, sorry, 10-year-old hat. You're looking at you, remembering the back of the day. But the MEF trust data that we reviewed yesterday, one thing that consumers really want is regulators to come in and protect and regulate big tech and their use of my personal data and my identity, how it works, protect children and the content that we see, help us moderate the content, give us control of that digital life that we are. And I just don't see them doing that. I see them catering more to the big tech, to the industry, doing exactly what the people don't want them to do. And the other thing, and then I'll conclude with this last statement, is when I talk to both company and regulators, they'll tend to say, well, people don't really care. And I actually think they do care, they just don't know how to care, or they're not given the tools, the resources, or the capabilities to do anything about they care. Because another results we got from the MEF research is that the vast majority of people feel digitally impaired and helpless, but yet they have no choice but to use these tools. And so how do you react to all of that? I don't know what my question was. That was more of an assessment of the landscape. How do you react to that?
So I'll add a question to that and tell you that you only got 3 minutes, just to make it a bit more interesting, so you go pressure. To that one is, it's interesting, you were talking about future, and what came immediately to me in my mind is what you were saying about the communication last week from the FCC chairwoman about the plan of, the new limitations on SMS spam. Mm-hmm. Or was it a plan? But anyway.
Not yet.
Which is, I'm thinking, it's the future, but I'm still struggling with the present. And even when I look at the future, though, I still think that we are stuck in the same situation. Web 3.0, we haven't solved identity in 2.0 yet. How can we build the foundations of the new web without some solid, soul searching on questions that are really at the core of what we do today? So.
Well, I think those are both great, and it really comes to, they actually intertwine, because really the question is, what are the regulators doing for us? Like, how can they give us, like, protection if they're asking the same wolf to wipe the feathers from their jowl and say, can you go check out the hen house, somebody's in it, right? Well, that's what's really happening right now. Because the lobbyists, well, you have this, the regulators are the kick the can folks, right? I'm in this lifer position. There's no passion in the FCC anymore. There's no passion in the FTC. They are, I got hired by the FCC or FTC. I'm just going to kick this can until I retire down the road. It's going to be someone else's problem. And we saw that starting to happen in Web 2.0. So the answer is self-sovereign identity, which is just basically us stepping out of the matrix, taking the right pill, and understanding that this isn't about them anymore, right? We have given the power of our identity to third parties for far too long, and all they've done is get hacked and shared our data across multiple industries. No matter what industry, it's been hacked, as long as it has a centralized database. So the future is using new technology in it and working hand in hand with the regulators, but they need to open their eyes and say, we're open to new technology, not the same old lobbyists that are coming to DC. Thank you very much, everyone, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the show. We love MEF, and we hope you do too.
Thank you.